So hello everyone and welcome to this presentation which is all about digital transformation. It's a really big topic at the moment in Australia, around the world. A lot of people are talking about digital transformation and what that means for themselves, their teams and their organization. So this is really for you if you're leading a team, if you're leading an organization, maybe even for your own business, if you're thinking about what does digital transformation mean and what can we do to make sure that it's a success. So we're going to cover a number of things in the 45 minutes that we've got together. I want to make it quite interactive as well, and quite there's an opportunity for you to participate as we'll see. In fact, let's start that now. So the first thing I want to do is let's talk about Netflix. Because it's something that's grown a lot in the last year in particular. And I want to talk about the Netflix experience as we know it now and going back to when Netflix started. So let's just to get going and to give us a chance to experiment and engage in the chat room as well. If you can type in the chat room something that you've been watching on Netflix that you would recommend for other people. And the way to do this, if you haven't used the chat room in Zoom before, you can set it up to either all panelists, which just means me, or you can set it up for all panelists and attendees. So please choose the attendees option as well, all panelists and attendees, so that everyone gets to see what you're recommending on Netflix. So yeah, so if you Queen's Gambit, yeah, Schitt's Creek, fantastic. Okay, let me give you my favorite one that I've been watching recently, Upper Middle Bogan. It's an Australian comedy series. It's a little bit like a cross between Sea Change and The Castle. So for the Australians who understand those cultural references, you know that. Ginny and Georgia, interesting. Yeah, okay. Bridgerton. Yes, some people say I don't have Netflix. Disjointed, The Last Dance. Nikki says SBS The Killing. Okay, let's see what else is coming through. Okay, so this is really good because it's given me some recommendations of what I should watch when I get to the end of season 3 of Upper Middle Bogan. But the reason I'm sharing this with you, and I ask you to do this now, is if you think about Netflix, all of the things that are coming up in the chat room now, any one of us who's got a Netflix subscription could go there and watch it anytime we want to, because Netflix gives us all the, if you like, I know it's not the only thing that, the only services out there, but it gives us access to everything for a small monthly fee, for a small monthly subscription. Netflix did not start that way. So if you know anything about the history of Netflix, you know that it started not as a streaming media company that we know now, but it started as a DVD rental service. They were competing with Blockbuster, and they looked at what are the problems and what are the complaints that people have when they're dealing with a video rental service like Blockbuster. And the two things that people didn't like, one is they didn't like having to return the videos after they watched them, and the second thing was they didn't like paying late fees. So Netflix said, let's fix both of those problems. So they set up an online DVD rental service. So videos were still pretty big at the time, but Netflix decided to go for DVDs because DVDs were lighter. So what Netflix did was they said you could order your DVD online from our website, it gets posted out to you, and when you're finished with it, pop it in the reply paid envelope. We'll take care of the postage, which is why they went for DVDs, because they were lighter, they could absorb the cost, and there won't be any late fees. And then what happened was that people started getting better internet access. So they started getting broadband internet. And Netflix said, well, that's kind of useful for us now. So they didn't say, let's make our DVD rental service faster. They said, let's switch to providing downloadable or streaming content online. And so then they switched their service, and people could then order and pay $5 for a movie, which they'd then get access to for a few days or so. And then people started getting comfortable with giving companies their credit card details and being charged a monthly fee for that. In the early days, people were a bit wary of that because they thought there were a lot of scams out there, but then people started getting comfortable with that. And Netflix said, that's really good. We can now start all-you-can-watch service, so you can pay a subscription fee, and then you get access to everything that we've got available. And then what happened was that the movie and the TV companies, they loved this. The production companies loved it because it was a new way for them to license their material. And every time somebody watched something on Netflix, they got a little royalty. So they liked it at first. And then they realized that Netflix was getting so big, it was actually harming some of their other distribution channels. So they stopped licensing their material to Netflix. And Netflix said, well, okay, but we know that our customers still want to get access to content. So what they did was they built so they create their own content now. And now they've got one of the biggest lots in Hollywood where they create their own original content. So all the way along, Netflix said, let's find out what our customers want. Let's find out what we're capable of doing, and let's give that to them. Even though they started by sending out DVDs in the post, when they realized that that's not what customers wanted anymore, and the technology allowed them to do something different, they shifted. They completely shifted. Netflix is my poster child of a company that's gone through some digital transformation. Netflix CEO, Reed Hastings, called No Rules Rules, he talks about some of the things that Netflix did. And so one of the things they do is that they pay people above average, so they make sure that they pay people the best in the industry. In fact, they encourage their employees to go around and look at what other companies are paying for equivalent work, and then come back and renegotiate with Netflix to get pay rises. Another thing they do is they have this culture of radical transparency and trust. So you can agree with your manager that you can put in an expense report and it gets approved immediately without getting checked. And what they say is that if you have that agreement, that's okay, we will trust you. But the occasional audit, if it finds that you've cheated on an expense report, then you're instantly dismissed. So it's like, we trust you until we can't trust you anymore. And they do some other interesting things as well, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. I'll talk about the bonus thing later as well. So Netflix, I wanted to start with that example because it's a really good example of a company that decided to do transformation. As it turned out, digital transformation, but they did it well, and they did it intentionally to make sure that they could solve the problems and the challenges that their customers had. Okay, so in the time that we've got, in this 40 minutes or so that we've got, I want to go through the 3 biggest mistakes that people make, and particularly leaders make, when it comes to digital transformation. And the way we're going to do it, so my general rules of engagement in all my presentations, I want to give you things to think about. So here's a chance for you to turn off the rest of the world and just focus and think about stuff in the next 35 to 40 minutes. Also be a bit playful here. So we will do a few more exercises like that. Like I want to start with something interactive. We'll have a couple of puzzles and even some prizes to give away during this session. And it's better if you think big and you then when you get back into the real world, then you can walk back some of your ideas. It's easier that way than the other way around, where you just think small now, and then when you get back to everything else that's interrupting and distracting you, that you try to think big. So be a bit playful and think big. And I really want you to get some things that you can take away and use. For people who don't know me, I'm looking at the list here. Most people here, or a lot of people here, I do recognize the names, but there are some people who are joining for the first time. And so if this is your first time here, welcome to you as well. You can find out all about me at gihanperera.com. I've worked with a lot of organizations around Australia and New Zealand mainly. These are some of the people that I've worked with at a leadership level, looking at what's important to them. And I'm just sharing this with you to show you that there's, like, across the board, people have got similar challenges, especially when it comes to leadership and especially when it comes to transformation. There's some research that was done by KPMG. At the start of every year, they survey Australian CEOs and they say, what's keeping up at night? You can Google this. There's a free report that you can download. What are your biggest challenges? And for the last 3 years before this year, so 2018, 2019, and even the start of 2020, before the pandemic, the number one thing that was keeping people up at night strategically and CEOs at C-level was digital transformation. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. But what did that mean? It actually didn't slow down digital transformation. If anything, it accelerated it. So, like COVID-19's created a health crisis and an economic crisis, and by the way, a social crisis as well. But we talk a lot about the health crisis, the economic crisis, and absolutely we recognize and acknowledge the word that the heroes of the health crisis are our frontline healthcare workers. But there's a lot of digital that's happened as well in our connected world. We've got QR codes, we've got contact tracing apps, we've got COVID safe apps, we've got telehealth, we've got people using their personal devices to send remote data about their health because people don't want to go in and see people see their health professionals in person. And then if you look at the economic crisis, of course, we've had digital technology has had a huge impact there as well, with things like working from home and setting up the infrastructure for that, and the cloud platforms and the security issues around that. So digital has really been accelerated. Some companies are saying that the COVID-19 has accelerated their digital transformation process by 6 or 7 years. So they're 6 or 7 years ahead of schedule as a result of COVID-19 because they've had to do it. That's the good news. The bad news is that McKinsey says that most organizations or teams who go through transformation, any kind of transformation, will fail. And today I want to talk about some of the reasons for that so that you can avoid becoming one of those, becoming part of that statistic. I tell you a little bit about myself, and normally I don't say a lot more about myself, but today I want to, because I just want to give you an idea of my background in digital, because some of the things I'm going to say today may sound like I'm anti-digital, and I'm absolutely not. I'm absolutely not. I'm not a digital native. I didn't grow up with an iPad in my hand, but I have had a long history in digital. So I went to the University of Western Australia, graduated with a computer science and maths degree. So that was in the very early days. In fact, it was the very early days of the internet. My first job as a software developer, we were building software that would monitor undersea cables to make sure that they were stable and reliable. These were the cables that were carrying the early internet. My first overseas work trip was to a remote corner of Hong Kong Island, where our client was laying these cables, and we were installing the systems that would do the monitoring of them. And we were I never programmed this kind of antiquated hardware, but we had antiquated computers at the time that were linked to that kind of hardware. About 25 years ago, I started one of Australia's first web design companies. So this is what websites looked like 25 years ago. And this is the time when people were saying to me, clients were saying to me, this internet thing, do you think it's just a fad? Okay, but there's some people who believed in it, and they were the early adopters in that area. For about 15 years, I've been championing this idea of people working away from an office. And about 10 years ago, it was such a big deal that it was newsworthy. And I remember working on my laptop, sitting outside at an outdoor cafe, and a local journalist walked by and he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him what I was doing. And he thought he was newsworthy enough to write up an article about me in the community newspapers. And about 10 years ago, my friend Chris Pudney and I wrote this book called Out of Office, which is how to convince your boss that you can be just as productive when you're working away from an office. So I'm only sharing this with you to just say that I've got a strong digital background, but the 3 mistakes that I'm going to share with you today are really not about digital. It's not about the technology that you use. It's not about the how you integrate digital into your organization. That's really important, but that's not what comes first. Okay, so let's look at what does make a difference. So the 3 biggest mistakes that I see leaders and teams making with digital transformation come in these 3 areas. So first of all, what's your focus? The second one is, how do you use the assets and resources that you've got? And the third one is, how do you leverage the expertise that you've got in your organization, and how do you bring in outside expertise as well? We'll spend most of our time on the first one, because I think it's the most important one, and the one where you'll get the biggest leverage if we start with that one. So first, before we do that, I wanted to run a little bit of a poll, but we'll do the poll in the chat room here. So I'm just curious to know, what does digital transformation mean for you? So when I do this with organizations and teams, I always ask them, what does digital transformation mean for you? And I don't mind what the answer is. It doesn't have to be a technical answer. Some people say that it's hard work. Some people say that it's easy. Some people say it's a threat. Some people say great opportunities. Some people say AI. I want to give you the chance. What does digital transformation mean for you? So Mike has said easier for the customer. So if you can, again in the chat room, if you can make sure that your setting is all panelists and attendees, so then everybody else can see it as well. But I'll also read out some of the answers so that everyone hears them. So moving all paper things to online. Yep. Efficiency, ease of access, efficient and flexible operation, continuous improvement of business processes, online learning, leveraging digital technology to meet customer expectations, software and internet-based, great experience. Fear of the unknown for those who aren't digitally aware. Automation of process, yeah, efficiency. Good, fantastic. Okay, and all of these answers, of course, are correct. There's no wrong answer as far as this goes. But I really want to make the point that digital transformation should really be about transformation, not only about digital. So that's the first thing that I want to say. So when you start thinking about the focus of this transformation process, it should not be about digital, it should be about transformation. So let me give you an example. And I'll give you an example of something that happened early in the pandemic. So this is a little bottle of liquid that I got from a gin distillery called Republic of Fremantle. So Republic of Fremantle is a relatively new distillery that's opened up in the last couple of years. And what they did was they have a membership program. So a couple of years ago for Christmas, I bought my fiancée Nikki a membership, because she's a G&T fan, to Republic of Fremantle. And what this distillery did at the start of COVID, as many others did, was, of course, they switched to providing hand sanitizer, because they had the capability to do that. And so they said, our customers, they still want gin, but they also want hand sanitizer, and we can provide that. So it's a really good example of even a very small business making a transformation based on customer demand. What has that got to do with digital? Nothing. And that's my point. It's about looking at your customers first, and even your employees, and improving the customer experience and your employee experience. And that's what your digital transformation process should be about. It's not about digital first. And the biggest mistake that I see people make, the biggest, is when they think digital transformation, they immediately go to digital and they focus too much on digital. It's like, if you cared about climate change and sustainability, and you should, you might say, I'm going to drive an electric car rather than a petrol car. That's good. But if you focus on electric transformation and you go, I'm going to do everything electric, then you might ride an electric bike instead of a pedal bike. And again, that's not so good. So don't focus on technology. That's not the solution. It's about making sure that you can solve your customers' and clients' problems. So let me give you a couple of other examples of this. Again, a couple of pandemic examples, because they're front of mind and we can relate to them now. Singapore Airlines, like most airlines, had most of their fleet grounded, and still does, and they couldn't provide the experience that they normally do, which is sending people off to exotic places. And what they decided to do for their, if you like, their first class customers and members, who would normally, they would be able to provide them a luxury experience to send them somewhere else, they couldn't do that anymore. So what they offered instead was, you could get from Singapore Airlines a chef to come to your house in Singapore, it's only available for Singapore residents, to come to your house and cook you a fine dining meal at home, served on Wedgwood china, which you get to keep afterwards. It comes with fine wines and Dom Perignon champagne, and for you and your partner, it just costs you $900. So Singapore Airlines said, we want to provide luxury experiences, and we can't do it the way we were going to, so how can we do it another way? And again, what's this got to do with digital? Very little. But they looked at, what do our customers want? Another quick example, the Stadt Hotel in Sweden, early in the pandemic. Sweden didn't have a strict lockdown as we did here. It wasn't government mandated, but they still told their people that this is dangerous. And as a result, hotels had lots of empty rooms, as they did elsewhere in the world. And the Stadt Hotel saw a problem and an opportunity. So the problem was, of course, for them, they had empty rooms. But the problem for their guests and their customers was that they still wanted to go out, but of course they were worried about catching coronavirus and then contracting COVID-19. And so they said, the manager of the Stadt Hotel said, we've got an opportunity here. We've got these empty rooms, so they converted them into private dining suites. So you could book a hotel room to go and have dinner with the people in your family in a safe place. So you could order food from the fancy restaurant downstairs. You could still go out, have a meal cooked for you, but you could do it in a way that was safe. So the Stadt Hotel again said, what are the problems that our customers have and how can we solve them? And that's really what we should be looking at when we think about transformation and digital transformation. And it applies equally when you're thinking about the employee experience as well. We saw this big scramble to create this working from home culture, and it was forced on us back in March and April last year. And many organizations are saying, phew, glad that's over, especially around Australia. We're saying, let's get everyone back into the office, but not everyone. So Siemens, they decided to use this as an opportunity to say, well, no, if we can get our people working from home and the office has only been around for 200 years, why does it have to be our default place of work? Let's allow people to work from anywhere. And Siemens, about the middle of last year, said, we will allow, in fact, everyone, all Siemens office employees around the world, in 150,000 people in 40 plus countries, can work 2 to 3 days a week away from the office. They can work from anywhere. Now, at the moment, it's mostly going to be working from home, but there's no reason why they can't work from cafes or hubs or co-working spaces in the future. Because what Siemens says is we trust our people. If we tell them what we want from them, then we will trust that they'll do the right thing. So again, it's about looking at how can we use digital to enable a better experience. This is the CEO of Siemens who said, yep, we trust our people to do it, and it doesn't have to be in an office. So this is the key first message. The digital transformation is first about people. It's not about technology. Now, I don't want to diminish the importance of technology. It is. I mean, it's built into the word digital. But it's that the first step is figuring out what problem you're solving for people. I want to quickly check if there are any questions or comments in here, and then I'll run a little bit of a poll, because I do want to talk about the technology as well before we leave this, because I'm sure you came here expecting to hear something about technology. So I'm going to ask you what level you are at with digital, but I just want to check there's no questions coming in just yet. Good, okay. So what I want to ask you is, how digital are you at the moment? And so we're going to have a poll, and it's going to have 5 options on there, actually 6 options, because one of them is not digital yet. But there's 5 levels that you can be with digital. Let's do this. Let me sketch this out for you. Okay, so I'll give you the 5 levels here, and then I'll run the poll. So we've got these 5 levels. So the first one is just bits. So this is where you go from atoms to bits, where you go from physical to digital. And I want you to think about what's a core service or product that you're offering, and how digital, where are you on this scale? Now, it doesn't mean that you have to completely transform everything. So if you are selling books, it doesn't mean that you have to get rid of all your books and only sell ebooks. If you're providing a service, like a hotel is providing accommodation, it's a physical service, it doesn't mean that you're going to become a virtual hotel. What does that mean? But it could mean that when people check in, instead of you giving them a plastic key card, perhaps when they book online, they get a code that they can scan on their smartphone, and they just use their smartphone to open up the doors, so they don't need a physical key card, something like that. The next level is cloud. So this is, and there's 2 levels of cloud. So one level of cloud is like the iCloud, where you put stuff in the cloud and it's accessible on all your devices. The better one is where it's a general cloud. Cloud just means putting your data on the internet securely and allowing access selectively to people. So this is what's enabled working from home, because we need data and applications in the cloud rather than sitting on a server in your office that you have to physically be there to use. The next level after cloud is open. So open says your data are not only in the cloud, but you give access to anybody, but in a very selective way. So if you've heard of an API, application programming interface, that's what it is. It's just it's a way that people can come in from outside, again securely and with permission, and get access to your data. So you may not know that Australia in the last couple of years has created an open banking API. So it means that every bank has to allow customers to give access to their data to somebody else. So you could imagine there's an app developer who's created a great budgeting app, or manage your spending, and if they had access to your bank statements, they would be, and your bank transactions, they would be able to advise you on how to spend better and budget better. Or they might have access to thousands of people, and they say, well, we've got 10,000 people who are using this electricity company. Let's go to the company and say, we've got 10,000 customers. Can you give us a bulk discount? Okay, so now Australian banks have to do that. There is an open banking API, which means that you as a customer, if you wish to, can give access to these apps that we don't have many of them yet, but they will come soon, and they really open up more power to external providers. And of course, the banks aren't necessarily going to create these apps. Sometimes they do, but it's better if you have anybody else who wants to, anybody who's got an entrepreneurial idea can get access to it. The next level is artificial intelligence, which is a similar sort of idea, but AI uses these open APIs to then get access to data and does smart things with them. And the last level, which not a lot of people go to, is the idea of creating a platform. A really good example of a platform is the Apple App Store. So Apple is a hardware company. So they're a consumer electronics company. They sell hardware. But they also have an App Store, which is a platform, which actually doesn't do anything by itself. So the App Store doesn't help you in any way if you've got an iPhone or an iPad, but it allows other developers from around the world to install software or to provide software which you can choose to download and install that enhances the quality of your iPhone and the performance of your iPhone. It's interesting that Steve Jobs, when they were first developing the iPhone, he was dead against the idea of having an app store. He really didn't like it. He had to be dragged kicking and screaming to put an app store on the iPhone to provide a platform for other people to come in and enhance the quality of your device. Now, without an app store, the iPhones would still be a great device, but it's nowhere near as good because Apple's developers, obviously they're really, really smart, but they're nowhere near as smart as the collective power of any other developer and every other developer on the planet. So, okay, so how digital are you now? My apologies, you might need to refresh that link. Okay, so, let me remove my camera. So where are you now? Are you physical, which isn't none of the above, or are you at this level? Oh, it's interesting to see there's some people who are looking at platforms, which is interesting. Okay, good to see. Okay, so it's interesting that this is not surprising that a lot of people have cloud in there, which is not surprising, and some people are going to, they're doing some of their stuff which is digital, which is bits. Fantastic. That's really useful. That's really useful. And also, you don't have to go to the higher levels. You don't have to be all the way across on this spectrum. So very few organizations will build a platform because that platform is quite a radical transformation. I reckon you should be thinking about AI and allowing artificial intelligence, at least allowing the capability for artificial intelligence to get access to your data. And the way you do that is making sure that you have your data as open. It doesn't have to be open. It can be simply in the cloud, and then you just have AI accessing it in the cloud, but it's useful to have it open as well. Okay, and this is not surprising. So most people are in the cloud, and it's actually interesting to see that there's some people who are already thinking about open APIs and have that in their business, in their organization. That is uncommon. So I haven't seen, when I've done this before, I haven't seen like 20% of people who are already thinking open, which is good if you are. It's really good if you are. But I think even if you're in those first two areas, bits and cloud, that's a good first step. Again, I come back to make sure that you're doing it because you're solving your customers' and clients' problems. Okay, let's look at this second area. So I want to look at, and we, as I said, we spend most of our time on that first mistake, which is focus, and is focusing on making sure that you can solve your customers' and clients' problems. And I wanted to do it that way because I want to say, start from the outside when you're thinking about digital transformation, and then we'll narrow in. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to narrow in. And so the second area is how you're using your assets and other resources. Let me tell you about a story about a workshop that I was running a couple of years ago. It was about innovation, and it was a workshop for leaders from different organizations. And there was one of the leaders there. She was working at a university, not this one here. This is the University of Western Australia, and I just put up that photo because that's where I went to uni. But it was one of the other universities, one of the major universities in Australia. And we were talking about innovation. And I asked the group to have a chat among themselves and then just share what they're doing in terms of innovation in their organization. And so this leader was in charge of the student experience center at her university. Now, student experience is a big part of the university because universities are very competitive. It's one of Australia's biggest exports with international students, not so much in the last year, but it really is. It's a massive revenue generator for Australia and for universities, and so they're all trying to attract students, not just internationally, but domestically as well. So student experience is a huge part of what they do. And so she was talking about some of the things that they were doing at their university to improve and enhance the student experience. So imagine yourself. Imagine that if you're in charge of student experience at one of Australia's leading universities, what are some of the things that you might do? What are some of the ideas you have to improve and enhance the student experience? I'll ask you to share that in the chat room, and I'll keep an eye on this, but I'll also give you some ideas of what she said. So for example, some of the things she said were, improve safety and security for women who are on campus at night and who are studying. Provide more food options and a different variety of options. So they had food trucks and stuff coming in rather than just the fixed options that were available. What are the other things that she said? Do for the university to organize more social activities and provide more of a forum for students to organize their own activities. I can see things here: online tutorials, childcare, understand and seek to fulfill student expectations, access to lecturers, comfortable place to meet. See, one thing that occurred to me as she was talking about these things was that almost everything she described was not so much, it was definitely part of the student experience, but very much it was about the campus experience. So almost all her ideas were how to improve the experience for students on campus. Now, why does a university with a large campus focus on the campus experience? Because they have a campus. They have this big, expensive, and really valuable resource and asset that they put a lot of money in, billions of dollars into it, and they want to make sure that they can get a return on that. That's good, but it constrains, in this case, it constrained her thinking to automatically think of, as soon as you think student experience, that's constrained to campus experience, because you've got this huge asset and resource which has this massive gravitational pull every time you start thinking about anything that you're going to do, any change that you're going to do. And it's one of the challenges that you have and you're going to have on any sort of transformation journey. If you have these massive assets that you've sunk a lot of money into, then there's a really good chance that they're going to drive your innovation and possibly constrain it. So I said to her, the way to get around this is not that you get rid of your campus, but you start every conversation about change and innovation, and bigger than that, transformation, by starting by saying, imagine if we didn't have a campus, what would we do? Now, we still have it, and we can bring it in and we can take advantage of the campus, but imagine if we didn't. And there are online universities now which don't have a campus, and they leverage the fact that they're purely online, purely digital. So all the lectures are available online and can be accessed at any time. You can enroll in a class anytime you want to. It doesn't have to be at the start of each term and each semester. You have ways for you to do assessment, but the assessment is done digitally now with AI, but also with humans who can do the assessment. And then you have much more peer assessment. They even allow people, they facilitate ways that people who are living in the same city, who are doing the course at the same time, they facilitate that they can do meetups and meet in person to do their study. But they start by the idea of saying we don't have a campus, so we don't have this resource that we have to feed, and we don't have to support it. So just be careful of that. Whenever you're doing any sort of transformation process, these assets that you've got may be holding you back. And one of the biggest assets that you've got, of course, are your people as well. And just be aware of that. I'm going to talk very soon about how you leverage the power of your people, but also be aware that they might sometimes hold you back. I love this quotation from Upton Sinclair, an American author. He said, it's difficult to get somebody to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it. And it's one of the challenges that you're going to face, that You've got people who've got a vested interest because their salary, their reputation, the power base that they've built up, their status within their social circles that are going to be threatened if you go through with this transformation. I want to tell you one more story about Netflix and what Reed Hastings said at Netflix. So Netflix does not have performance-based bonuses. So they don't say, let's get together at the start of the year, set some KPIs for you, and we'll give you a bonus if you exceed them. The reason why is because you're then motivating people and you're giving people an incentive to hit and beat those targets, which sounds good. But if something really disruptive comes along in the middle of the year, or if someone has a really disruptive idea that could completely change what they do and could have an impact on their bonus, they're less likely to do it because it's going to have an impact on their bonus. And so they don't want to create these processes and these systems that could be a disincentive to innovation, change, and transformation. So just be careful of things like that, because you may be unintentionally creating that. Let's look at this third area here, which is again looking at your expertise in your team as you're looking at this transformation, because it relates directly to your people. And I've called this expertise rather than people, because it's not about the people themselves, it's about the expertise that they have. Okay, I've got a competition for you. There's a few people here who might have seen me do this before and who might have an idea, so you've got a bit of a head start if you know the answer to this. So I've got a competition for you. I've got a copy of my book, Disruption by Design, to give away to the first person who gets the right answer to these three questions. These three questions are maths questions, mathematics. So you may be rolling your eyes and going, I was never very good at maths. That's okay. They're pretty simple questions. They've got simple answers. And what I'd like you to do is, as soon as you think you know the answer to all three, I'll put all three up on the screen at the same time. As soon as you think you know the answer to all three, type them in one line, and I can see your set of three answers. And we'll see who gets the answers correct first. I've done this with lots of groups, and I reckon the world record for this exercise is 23 seconds to get a winner. Women seem to do better than men at this. I don't know why. I don't know if there's a particular reason, but anyway, we'll see. So I'm going to show you the questions soon. And remember, there's a copy of my book, Disruption by Design, and for the winner here. So it's a high-stake game here, right? All right, let's see how we go. And just type your answers in the chat room as soon as you know the answer to all three of the questions. And look, you don't have to get all three right. If the winner only gets two right, that's okay. That's fine. Okay, here we go. There are the questions. And I'll just keep an eye on the chat room to see what people are saying. So remember, write all your three answers on the same line, so I can quickly see if anyone's got the right, all three of them. Okay, so I want answers to all three. Okay, so I can see some people have got two answers correct. So if you want to have another go, and you've had a go, but as far as I can see, no one's yet got all three. You're welcome to have another go if you want to. Okay, still I don't see anyone with all three, but I can see a couple who've got two correct. All right, let me show you the answers with you. So here's some answers. $1, 10 minutes, 750 grams. I wonder how many people got some of those answers, because I reckon if you did, okay, if you did, bummer, because all those answers are wrong. All right, let me tell you the right answer. So the right answer to this, so the bat and the ball together cost $11. That must mean the ball costs 50 cents and the bat costs $10.50. That's the only way you can get a difference of $10. 5 men can paint 5 walls in 5 minutes, so it takes 5 minutes to paint a wall. 10 men will also take 5 minutes because they've got 10 walls. And a fish weighs 500 grams plus half its weight. So that means that 500 is half, and the other half is what gets added on. So it weighs 1 kilogram. Okay, so those are the right answers. And I'll just see, there's interesting. I think maybe 1 or 2 people got that. So, okay, so here's the thing. If you got 2 out of 3 correct, this is an honesty system, and you would like a copy of my book, Disruption by Design, then note in the chat room, and you can send this just to panelists, just send me your postal address because I want to send you a physical copy of the book. So if you got 2 out of 3 at least, then I'm happy to send you a copy of the book. Give me your postal address for that and we'll send it out to you. But the reason I want to share this is because there's an important point that I'm making here. And the point is this, that the reason that most people, like we are pattern making machines. And the more experience you have, the better you are at creating, at seeing patterns, identifying patterns, and then solving if there's a problem. So you see this thing that says there are 2 things that cost $11, the difference is $10, therefore there must be subtraction involved, so we subtract them. We see a 5, 5, 5, and we go, it must be 10, 10, 10. We see 500 plus half, we go, well, it must be half of 500, because that's the only number that we can see, and we're really used to finding, doing halves of numbers, so we add them. This is good. This is good if you're a leader and you've got a lot of experience, and your experience has given you the ability to make good decisions in an environment where you know that if they're in the same environment, you can keep making good decisions. The trap is that many experienced people are now finding themselves in environments where they're not so good at they're different environments, and so the decisions they made aren't necessarily going to work for you just as well. And so it's one of the things, especially with, and I talk about this with any sort of change, be aware of this. The more experienced you are, be more aware of it. And especially when you're talking about something like transformation, which by definition means completely changing what you're doing, then just realize that the experience and the expertise that you've got and that has served you well so far might not help you so much in the future. One last story. I want to share a story of my stepdaughter, Abby. So this is my fiance, Nikki, and her daughter, Abby. This is about 5 years ago when she was in high school. And Abs and I used to spend time together occasionally, like we'd go out to breakfast or lunch, and we'd have a meal and have an interesting conversation. And of course, as soon as we ordered and the meal arrived, what's the first thing that she did? She took out her phone, took a photo of it, and posted on social media. I think it's a law. So she did that, and I thought it was really interesting, and I knew that she used to use Snapchat, and I didn't know much about Snapchat, and so I always used to ask her about what she was doing. And I remember one time, we went to my favorite Italian restaurant. We were having a meal there, and she took the photo, and I said, Abs, are you using a particular Snapchat filter or a location filter? And she said, oh, no, we don't use Snapchat anymore because Instagram has just come out with their stories feature, and that's so much better. So my friends and I, we've all switched over to Instagram. And I thought, isn't that interesting? When was the last time that I made such a radical change? Because again, I do the stuff that I'm used to doing and that I'm familiar with. And how often is it that we make a radical change like that? And I reckon we should be doing this more often. So Abby just last week graduated from Curtin University with a physiotherapy degree, and she's just out of work as a recent graduate. And I reckon if I was her boss and working in her organization, and we were doing any sort of change process, I would be looking at the Abbies in my team who, they don't fear change, they love change, they expect it, they're bored if they don't get change. And you want to bring them along on the journey. So that's really important, and I think it's a really important thing that we should be doing. When we're thinking about transformation, it's not only the people who have got the expertise from the past, but it's people who've got different experiences, different expertise. I know Nikki Howe's here, and she's the author of a great book called Difference Makers, which is all about diversity and inclusion. So my definition of those is diversity is like having a whole bunch of colored textures. Inclusion is about using them. And I think we need to use the diversity that we've got much more now than we ever have before. Here's one little exercise for you around that. Let me ask you my final puzzle for today. Does anyone recognize this sequence of letters? You can see it here, P, Y, F, G, C. Does anyone recognize that? Let me just see if anyone's got the answer. It's an eyesight test. It's not an eyesight test. It's a particular pattern of letters, and it is, before I tell you that, does anyone recognize this? QWERTY, if you like. Okay, so we know this one, right? So this one is obviously the sequence of the way our keyboards are laid out. So where did QWERTY come from? So more than 200 years ago, there's a guy named Christopher Scholes, and he invented this device, which he called a typewriter. And it was a mechanical device where you could type on paper. And he experimented with various layouts. So initially, it was all set out. The keys were, as you can imagine, alphabetical. But he found that when they were very fast typists who got very good at it, when they were typing on an alphabetical keyboard, they would quite often be pressing keys which are right next to each other, and then they would get stuck. And then they'd have to manually move the keys back and then type again. So experimented with different layouts, and he ended up with the QWERTY layout as being the best for having the keys far enough apart that people couldn't, that generally it would reduce the amount of jamming of keys. It meant it was a little bit less efficient because the fingers had to move a little bit further. This thing here, PYFGC, is the Voja keyboard layout, which has been proven to be more effective and more efficient for typing because the keys are closer together for the English language. Now, if you've got any sort of computer, other device, tablet or phone, of course we don't have the jamming problem anymore. And in a couple of minutes, you can switch your keyboard to use a Voja keyboard. Now, it takes a little bit to learn, of course, because it's a new setting, but it's more productive. And in the long term, and actually in the short term, you'll be much more efficient. How many people here are going to switch to the Voja keyboard as soon as you finish this presentation? Okay, I bet you most of us won't, because we do what's familiar to us and what we're familiar with. And I think it's really important for us to keep this in mind, that as we're going through this transformation process, as we're going through a change process, just keep in mind that you might at times get a bit frustrated and disappointed with how people are coming along on that journey. But every time you do that, just ask yourself, why haven't I switched to the Voja keyboard? Because change is not easy. It takes time to do, and it's definitely not easy to do. So I can see people who are going, oh, I see somebody said yes. So David said yes, fantastic, he's going to switch to Voja. But we're not used to change. We're hardwired not to like change. And I also think the older and more experienced we are, the less inclined we are to do this sort of change. So just be aware of that. Just be careful of that. Okay, so we talked about 3 things today. So if we're talking about the 3 biggest mistakes that people make with digital transformation, the 3 things we talked about are the focus, and make sure that your focus with digital is all about, as my clicker stopped, I'm just get my clicker working again. Make sure that you're focusing on solving your customer problems and improving your employee experiences. We talked about just making sure that the assets and resources that you've got, which could be valuable, might still be holding you back. And the last thing is just be aware of the expertise that you've got from outside and inside. And you may not be the best person to lead your transformation process. The best person to lead it is actually everybody. I know there are some people here who are experts in digital transformation, and I'm just going to check if Gabriella's here from Bremer or if Kamal's here from Digital Enact. Can you pop your web address or contact details in the chat for everybody else, because there are people who can absolutely help you with the digital side and the technology side of digital transformation. And I'm very happy, and I'd recommend that you do bring on board people who know how to do that. But do it with starting with people first and being digital second. So digital is a way to solve the people problem, to solve the problems that your people who are customers or employees have. I'm going to finish with this quotation from a guy from MIT, and he says digital transformation, it's like turning a butterfly into a caterpillar, and it's a caterpillar into a butterfly. If you do it right, then your caterpillar turns into a beautiful butterfly. But if you do it wrong, all that happens is you end up with a really fast caterpillar, which is probably not what you're aiming for. And unfortunately, a lot of people, a lot of organizations, unfortunately, end up with really fast caterpillars, which don't really help them. They're going to be overtaken by butterflies. So the last thing I want to share with you, if you want to work with me on this, I have a keynote, not about digital transformation, but about, it's called Better Together, how humans and machines can work better together. Digital is, of course, part of that. And I run a masterclass, so you've seen a little bit of the content from the masterclass here today. And I also do some coaching in this area, and I facilitate, if you've got a leadership group, we do scenario planning. So we look at future scenarios, some digital, some not, and then how do you incorporate them into your strategic plan. In my book, Disruption by Design, I make the point that disruption and innovation, they're both about change. It's just disruption when it happens to you, and it's innovation when you make the change yourself. And I think especially in 2020, we've spent a lot of time being disrupted, and I think it's time to start innovating. So thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you for participating. I hope you got some value from that. There's still time if you got 2 of the 3 questions right, or even if you've got 1 out of the 3, or if you just like a copy of the book, look, I'm happy to open it up and send you a copy of the book, Disruption by Design. Thank you for participating, and I wish you all the best on your digital transformation journey. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the future. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.